And now, the presentation is going to be in two parts. The first one is a video, and it's only about 5 minutes long. Dan Reardon, who'd worked with me on this, unfortunately, he's not here tonight. He had to be out of town. But he just wanted to do a little introduction of what the cemetery looks like and where it is. So it's not going into great detail. The second part of the presentation is what I'll be doing along with my PowerPoint presentation. So that one will have most of the information you'll probably be wanting to hear. So I just wanted to let you know that. Okay, I'm ready to go. I gotta stand up here. Whoops. Here we are in front of St. Anne's home, which in 1824 was a land and homestead belonging to Alexander Hooker. Now we'll take a walk down the path to the old Hooker Pioneer Cemetery. This passage was written by Von Hildreth from the Irondequoit Press, 1958. Walk into any graveyard and you walk into the pages of history. Around you is a certain peace and quiet, not of the senses, but of the mind. You move among the graves and you feel that you are not in the midst of the dead, but rather with those who were alive and human and real, whose lives were vividly written novels, which one day a reader closed and put down. The headstones about you are their epilogues, not their epitaphs. In this old burial ground lies the remains of a hardy, self-sacrificing breed, the American pioneers. Some names you might be familiar with: Rudman, Butts, Forrest, and Hickok. Long before Alexander arrived, this land on the Sandy Hill Ridge, running parallel to 104 Expressway, you could probably hear the traffic going by, was an ancient sacred burial ground of the Iroquois. Alexander donated the cemetery land to the town of Irondequoit in 1840, which became the first public cemetery in Irondequoit. I would like to point out a few of the early pioneer grave sites. Samuel Green, age 27, was the first known burial. His epitaph reads, "Death is sent. Alas, how soon his morning sun goes down." Here is the Rudman family plot. They were known as the Peach Kings of Western New York. And then a little further back, we have the Perkins family plot. Mother Mary and daughters Ella and Alma were all drowned together in a pond on the land of Hosea Rogers. Here is Albert Hobby, a Black Hawk War veteran. He built the Hobby School, which is now the Turkish Cultural Center on Culver Road. Then James Swain. His tavern was at the corner of Culver Road and Ridge Road. It was known as Swain's Corner. Now, let's take a walk over to the Hooker family plot and headstones. Here lies Alexander Hooker. His epitaph reads, "He was honorable, he was just, he was patriotic." Lucy, his wife, reads, "She acted well her part and lies in Jesus. Now for part 2 of my live presentation.
Okay, so hidden in a clump of trees and wild, unkempt shrubbery on Portland Avenue, just south of Ridge Road, is a cemetery in which sleep some of the pioneers and war veterans of the 18th century. So stated Louis Dubelbeiss, December 1966. Let's begin by making it clear, and I have many, many questions on this, that the Hooker Cemetery had nothing to do with the burial of ladies of easy virtue. No, it's not as exciting as all that. So let's begin our story at the very beginning. In the 16th and 17th centuries, a sandy ridge was one of the locations where the Iroquois had erected a campsite to hold their council meetings. To them, it was sacred ground because they believed that the Great Spirit hovered over it. A man named Eli Buell knew much about the sandy ridge, having lived there for many years. He used to talk about the Seneca campsite on the ridge. His knowledge of the native peoples came from his uncle, Oliver Culver, who had many dealings with the Seneca chiefs. An agreement was made that the campsite should always remain in its natural form. Once the peace pipe had been passed around to all, it was considered a sworn statement. Sharing the peace pipe was meant to impress upon the memories of the white men that the campsite and the sandy ridge were meaningful to the natives because they considered it an ideal place to bury their dead. The oath sworn between Mr. Culver and the Senecas was honored for over 200 years. The ridge was a favorite Iroquois trail that ran from Boughton's Hill near Victor to the mouth of the Genesee River. In 1802, the merchants of Canandaigua made the trail into a roadway to transport furs and other goods on carts drawn by oxen. Destination was the port of Rochester, from which they smuggled Canadian whiskey back to Canandaigua. The whiskey was used for medicinal purposes, as well as to bribe the natives. There is still evidence of this roadway behind the Hooker gravestone. In 1823, Alexander Hooker brought his wife Lucy and their 3 little girls from Connecticut to a rundown cabin on the land which is now St. Anne's home. He purchased the land from a disgusted James Tainter, who was noted as saying, "Thanks for the $1,700. You're welcome to this farm and my old cabin. It's the second oldest log cabin in the township." Here is a photo of the first log cabin, which was on Brower Road. 8 families before us Tainters lived in that cabin and then gave it up on account of sickness. The illness was actually known as Genesee fever, an umbrella term for a variety of maladies, such as typhoid and malaria. Some of them are buried right over yonder in that old Indian burial ground on Sand Hill. I wish you better luck, but I don't mind saying, I'm glad we're moving to the Ohio. And don't forget, you promised to finish off my payments on this farm. However, Hooker was an enterprising man. He used profits from the sale of white pine trees he cut for lumber in order to hire men to drain and fill in the swamps. His farm prospered and he became a leader in the new town of Irondequoit, which split off from Brighton in 1839. Mr. Hooker and early pioneers used the sandy ridge as a burial ground themselves, but it was not a cemetery as we know it today. These pioneers had to bury their dead without the use of coffins, not even a crude pine box. No undertakers or memorial services conducted by ministers. The most they could do was lay them to rest as gently as possible near a lone pine or spreading oak tree. Thousands of our early pioneers were buried in this manner. So said Von Hildreth. The first burial for which there is evidence was for Samuel Green at the age of 27 in 1813. His epitaph reads, "Death is sent, alas how soon his morning sun goes down," at noon. Alexander's wife, Lucy, pointed out to Alexander that the log cabin was sinking. Well, he didn't really believe her at first, so after he measured the foundation, he concurred. He then built a handsome stone house for his wife and family. In 1840, Alexander Hooker offered the burial ground to the public with the provision that a group of designated persons would enclose the land and keep it in good order. A good substantial slat fence with red cedar posts was built around the burying ground, and a bridge was built connecting the cemetery to the back of the Hooker house. It's kind of strange, isn't it? But Lucy Hooker, she exemplifies the courage and tenacity of pioneer women. She came to the wilderness, helped clear the land and cultivate the soil. She raised a large family of 6 girls and 1 boy, and in her later years, Alexander died in his mid-40s. All of her children moved elsewhere, and she managed the farm with the help of a servant girl and some farm laborers. In the 1960s, the Hooker home was in disrepair due to vandalism, and the house was demolished to build St. Anne's home. An attempt was made by the newly formed Irondequoit Historical Society, and I know that Anne Raybach is here. She's one of the founding members of the society, and she was instrumental in helping to save this home for possible use as a museum. But the house, with its wide plank floors, hardwood banisters, and glass lights around the front door, fell to the wrecking crews. The period of 1850 to 1865 saw the largest number of Hooker Cemetery interments. And it is interesting to note that the birth dates of a few of these pioneers preceded our nation's founding. The cemetery was used around the turn of the 20th century. However, it seems as though the last burial was 1911. Part of its demise was due to a new town cemetery, which was created in 1895 from a few acres of farmland on Culver Road. This is the Irondequoit Cemetery. From about 1900 until the Depression, the cemetery was given some attention by the town, but funds were becoming less available to keep it up. In 1953, the VFW Post 2691 began to clear the underbrush, mostly wild grape and sumac. And as a result, the graves of 13 veterans were uncovered in 1955. The town replaced the slat fence and sprayed the grounds to kill the rampaging poison ivy. Unfortunately, that also killed 42 oak trees. From this time on, the desolate appearance of the burying ground led to accelerated vandalism, with headstones and other markers being dumped into Irondequoit Bay. Or, this is more interesting, being used for construction projects like home patios. So people who have homes in Irondequoit, you might want to look at your backyard patio and just see, is there part of the gravestone there? Kind of strange, wasn't it? Only the Hooker Monument remained intact. In the late 1970s, the town historian, Pat Wayne, and Peggy Green and others enlisted help to uncover the gravestones. And Ann, I think you were quite involved in that project also. But once again, tragedy struck when in attempting to unearth the markers, the land was accidentally bulldozed, leading to the loss of hundreds of stones. Today, there are only about 300 remaining. Much of what we know today is due to the diligent work of former town historians. There is now a list of names for all the stones, including epitaphs. There also is a list of the war veterans buried there. The veterans represent all the nation's wars, with the exception of the Mexican War, from the Revolution to the Civil War, including the Black Hawk War. I would like to mention a little something about the Black Hawk War, since it was one of the most obscure American wars. A native named Black Hawk and a band of his raided towns across the Midwest. He had just under 200 braves, working with him. And they did conduct raids between 1832 and 1833 because they didn't feel that they had been fully compensated for their land. Soldiers included Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis. Irondequoit men volunteered to go to the Midwest and fight in this war, which actually ended quite abruptly with the capture of Black Hawk. Service has been confirmed for all Hooker Cemetery Civil War veterans, including James Hooker, son of Alexander, who served with an Illinois unit. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Captain James Hooker. James was the only son of Alexander Hooker. He was only 14 when his father died. James helped his mother, Lucy, work on the farm and raise his 6 sisters. After being a traveling salesman, he bought a farm in Illinois. When the Civil War broke out, he enlisted in the Army and became a captain at the age of 29. After being caught in a violent sleet and snowstorm, he was in and out of hospitals for the rest of the war. Unfortunately, he never regained his health. He returned to his Illinois farm for 20 years. After his mother died in 1884, he returned to the Hooker homestead. Probably due to the effects of the Civil War, he became more and more of an eccentric. He lived in only one room of the spacious Hooker house. Each window was first curtained, then shutters were added and kept tightly closed. He became paranoid and added bars to the cellar windows. Fences and barbed wire were strung around the house. And James took to patrolling the grounds with a shotgun. He believed there was a conspiracy against him. Finally, James reached the stage where he was convinced that they were trying to poison him. He would eat only eggs prepared by the wife of his tenant farmer. One day, he found an egg with what appeared to be a pinhole in it. James suspected the worst, so he fed the egg to his cat for a test. The cat disappeared, and James told everyone that at last he had proof of the plot against him. But a few days later, the cat reappeared. But this failed to change James's convictions. When little 7-year-old Jean Kendrick was taken to visit her great uncle, her father warned her to never, never touch her nose with her finger, because James believed that this was the secret sign of his enemies. In the day of his death, James Hooker, the man who always carried a shotgun, became Irondequoit's boogeyman. Children walking down Portland Avenue past the Hooker house would grab hands and run as fast as they could. But a professor from the U of R said that James was actually a tall, blue-eyed, white-bearded man, stern but gentle, until he talked about they and plots. He died in 1907. He had never married, and he willed all of his property to the US government to build a military school in Irondequoit. And it had to be of high ethical standards. Theodore Roosevelt was named executor. But of course, the courts put his will aside, and this never came to fruition. So the period since the summer of 1985 has been productive due to the town putting crews to work, excavating the northwest portion of the cemetery to a depth of 10 feet, resulting in the discovery of a number of gravestone fragments and of some entire markers. Today, it looks well cared for. The Hooker Cemetery must be preserved, since it is the final resting place for Irondequoit's pioneers and war heroes. It reveals the names of hardy settlers whom, through untold hardships and constant battles with malaria and other diseases that infested the region, resulting in Irondequoit becoming the garden spot of New York State. The ghosts of the 20 souls, all relatives of Alexander Hooker, buried on the lot, must rejoice when they see the shadow of this old sentinel monument standing there in memory of them. Now I will read some of the epitaphs we found on the stones of prominent Irondequoit residents. Reuben Hickok, going home to God. John Herman, an infant. So many children died in infancy. This lovely lad, so young and good, called home in early morn, just came to share so that a flower in paradise might bloom. And David Rudman, dear is the spot where Christians sleep, and sweet the strains that angels pour. Oh, why should we in anguish weep? And that's my presentation. And Thank you. I brought some photos of the cemetery and when they were doing the renovations, also some newspaper articles. And I also have tour, if you want to do a walking tour. I have some little maps you can take home if you would like, and it, lays out some of the people who are buried there. And also some pamphlets on the Pioneer Cemetery. Now, are there any questions? Yes.
Many early cemeteries banned black people from being buried there. Do you know if any black people are buried in those early cemeteries?
No, I don't know of any that have been buried there. We have a list of the people who are buried there, but I don't know anything, about them really, except for the founders of Irondequoit Farmers. It's an interesting question.
That is a good question.
Yes.
Because Dunbar was one of the first blacks in the Irondequoit. He's settled here.
He might,
That's a good question. If he is located there.
yes, I think he might be. I think he is. We have a list, but to see in front of the computer, there's a yellow sheet, but that may not be the complete. I'll find that out for you, and maybe I will before tonight.
I have a complete
Oh,
list.
you have the complete list?
There's no Dunbar in here.
Was it Bar, did you say?
No Dunbar.
Oh, Dunbar, okay. Oh, thanks, Ann.
Excuse me, Silas Dunbar, farmer on the west side of Brown Road, father-in-law of Clark Wilson. There is no date. Okay.
That could be him.
The town of Tryon.
And any other questions? Yes.
I remember something back in my brain someplace, that the town of Tryon, which is on the bay, that, on the way down towards the end of the bay, I thought was where the Dunbars settled. I don't know, do you know anything about that, or the town?
The Dunbar that we referred to, the first Dunbar, I believe he ended up moving with his family to Canada. That's the earliest, over the 1790s. You're looking at the 1790s, your first settler, hunter, fisher, trapper. But I think he moves to Canada, and that's where we lose term. There is a Dunbar farmer where, where they're, on the other side of Norton, that was, when a farmer died, then it was a different, quite a different family.
But Jim, what was his first name?
I'm not sure the first name.
But we know Dunbars, at least I do know Dunbars in Brighton, who are of African American descent.
Oh, okay. Well, we should look
I
at it.
believe the Tryon people were African American as well, but I don't know, I don't remember where I learned that. I do remember learning about it.
I think we have a question.
I call it, where do I park?
Oh, right at St. Anne's, kind of is, if you take the driveway into going to St. Anne's, there's a little parking lot there.
That's St. Anne's.
But you can park there. Yeah, I park there and then I just walk across the street and it's right there. Yeah. Yes,
No, you won't.
I'm a little bit late, I'm sorry if you
Yeah.
went over this, but the last time I was at the Hooker Cemetery was about maybe 2 years ago, and at that time, there were quite a few headstones that had been, they were on the ground, they were like in a state of disrepair.
Mhm.
I wonder if they've been repaired, or if the town monitors things like that.
there are some fragments, a lot of fragments of headstones that they can't really, put back together. There was one, I think there might be a couple that are toppled over.
Yeah, I think David
And-
Evans might be one of them.
Yeah, and the town of Irondequoit is supposed to be the caretakers for the cemetery. And I can always, point out to them, could they do something about those? Yeah, we just kind of, I just leave them as is, but yes, the town is supposed to, maybe the Department of Public Works could be involved with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else? Yes.
How long did it take you to put all this presentation together?
It took, I'd say, several months, because I had to do a lot of research first on it all, and then we, the recording in the cemetery, we went there 2 or 3 times to do that, and then the PowerPoint, actually, that was the easiest part of it, because I mentioned earlier that Dan Reardon helped with all of this. He did all the photography, and he put the PowerPoint together. I know, unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here tonight, and but I really, have great gratitude to him for what he did, because I think he did a really wonderful job putting it together.
I'd just like to leave some applause for your work and also for Irondequoit resident Dan Reardon.
Oh, thank you. Now please feel free to have some cookies and some soda and
Ellen,
look at all of this.
Ellen, if I can, I'm Jewel Rayburn, I'm treasurer for the Historical Society, but I also work with the historian's office along with Tim Judd in the red shirt back here. And if by chance you visit Hooker Cemetery at any time and you see something that may be out of the ordinary, you question, please call and leave a message at the historian's office so that we can contact the correct people to have it corrected if it needs to be, okay? That's important. And once again, the historian's office, we're here for anybody that's interested in coming down to the office and seeing what we have. And Tim has been working diligently as far as getting some pictures up on the hallway outside of our office and things like that. We want transparency. We're not hiding anything. We want people to see it. So by all means, take my number down. You can text me, okay? My number is 585-329-9089. If you want to text and set up a time when you'd like to come down, we'd love to have you, okay? Tim is usually there, barring unforeseen circumstances. He's usually there Tuesdays and Thursdays from about 9:30 till 11:30 or